Welcome everyone to our roundtable here at Los Angeles Outpatient Center. I'm Dominique, registered nurse and executive director here at LAOP. I am here with a very special guest, you guys, Christina Sieren. She is an author. Here's her book, you guys. Parenting Teen Girls. Oh my goodness. This is a good guidebook for you. It's on Amazon. Check it out. So Christina is a licensed psychotherapist with experience working with high-risk adolescents and their families. You guys, let's welcome Christina to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
So excited to be here.
Oh my goodness, I've been looking forward to this so much, and I just want you to tell us about yourself.
So I've been in private practice since 2015.
Okay.
And before that, I was doing community mental health, so working with specialized foster care and working with the legal system and really working with like severe trauma, severe anxiety, severe depression. But I'd say long before that, I started in the summer of 2004 in a residential facility, not having any clue of what I was doing or anything therapeutic. And thank goodness for all the people that were around me and helping me navigate that process. But I would say that's when my real training started and I got like a really good idea of what high risk looked like.
Yeah.
And so I was thrown into that. I actually didn't want to go back my second summer, but I was convinced by a colleague that it'd be a great idea. So I was like, sure, why not? And then ended up there another 2 more summers, was asked to supervise my third summer, and I was matched up with the teen girl group. So it was kind of out of the blue. I was scared out of my mind, but it was such an amazing experience. And ever since then, I knew that I would be working with adolescents from that point forward.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you kind of fell in your lap, and now you say, okay, I can't look away. This is my calling.
Yes.
Wow.
I think it was definitely one of the hardest but most rewarding probably summers of my life. And I always say to people, like, this really found me. And like, I feel like this was like really my purpose in the grand scheme of things. 'Cause before that, it was really like, I'm gonna work with the little kids and do play therapy and be on the floor.
Right.
And then I realized that was not for me. Like, I love working with adolescents. They're raw and they're real and they're straightforward.
Oh yeah.
There's not a lot of guessing with them a lot of times. So I love that piece of it.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that. Because that's the real nitty gritty, if you will. I'm a parent, so I can attest to that.
Yeah.
Now we want to take a deeper dive into the overarching topic of transitioning from adolescence to adulthood. Whew, it's a lot of work, guys. With your work with teens, we would love to get your perspective on these topics regarding the move into adulthood for a child, but also their parents. Let's talk about communication. Here's the situation. My daughter has been in her first semester of college for a few months now, and I've noticed she sounds distracted, distant, uninterested, and a bit sad, even when we chat on the phone. I am beginning to think something more is going on. So Christina, in your book, Parenting Teen Girls, you mentioned the importance of opening the door to these conversations. As our kids begin to transition into adulthood, how can we continue to prioritize effective communication while also respecting their boundaries? How can we do that?
You know, I think with that scenario, I think our natural inclination as parents would be to jump in and fix. So I call that the fix-it mindset is when we see a problem of sorts and we want to jump in and make sure that our child is okay, right? Our intentions are good, but then we start to get into a control type of arena where we want to fix and do, then we're lecturing and we're nagging. And so a lot of times I really encourage parents to take a step back and be curious in their observations. So what are they observing? What are they noticing? What have been the exact shifts? I think also with that specific question, how recent was that transition? If it's a very recent transition, some of that stuff could be, you know, somewhat normal.
Okay.
I also want parents really to get into their own internal process as well. Like, what is your response physiologically? So physically, what are you sensing in your body that is bringing up the stuff for you? And I think that lends itself to be able to ask yourself more explorative types of questions or open-ended questions. At the end of the day, too, I think parents need to trust their gut. So you know your child best. You are the expert on your child. You know what their previous level of behaviors look like, their previous level of functioning. So if you have seen a shift, I think it's a great opportunity to say like, hey, I've noticed X, Y, and Z,
Right.
and I am concerned.
Right.
Now, what can I do to help? Is there anything that I can do to support you, throughout this process and this transition?
Oh, that is powerful because we're fixers, right? And
Absolutely.
That's your innate function, is just to say, okay, I'll make it better. But I heard you say, the parent is doing the work, and you're also empowering the parent to trust what they feel inside.
Absolutely.
which is really powerful. Thank you for that.
And I think by empowering yourself, you're also empowering your child to work through those pieces, and also I think explore for themselves, what do I actually really need in this moment? How can my caregiver best support me?
Right.
So I think oftentimes we may not know in those moments what we need when we're going through such a big transition, and so we're bombarded with all these questions. What do you need? How can I help?
Right.
And I think it creates another level of like anxiety and this kind of, what would I say, like a frantic type of energy between the two. And I don't think we can really get into like a solution focused type of place when, both parties are in that place.
Yeah, that makes sense because as you stated, if it's been just maybe a few months and your daughter is trying to adjust to the college life, so that would make sense. And then you also talked about the parents doing the work and the child doing the work, and so we want to make sure that door is open for them to communicate and feel comfortable communicating and coming to you.
Right.
And not creating barriers or obstacles for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Now let me ask you another question.
Okay.
First, I'll start with a statistic that I got from your book. Supporting your young adult as their mental health issues evolve. And when I think about evolving, I kind of honestly think about them getting worse maybe, or maybe more apparent, because I can maybe see how they're handling stress and
Absolutely.
the difficulty that lies in that. So this statistic says, in your book you mentioned a statistic from the World Health Organization, which estimates that 10 to 20% of adolescents struggle with mental health issues. That is astonishing. That is very astonishing.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a question along those lines. If your child has struggled with mental health issues in their teen years, how can we as parents and guardians support and encourage and keep up their routine as they transition into adulthood?
This is such a good question. So I'm always looking at resources versus demands,
Okay.
and then also bringing in prevention planning as like a third pocket to that.
Okay.
So especially if a child, like in this question, has had a history of mental health, so maybe they've already, been in a program, or they've been in outpatient services, or they have resources and coping skills, I want to know what resources they have to date.
Okay.
So it's taking an inventory of all the things that we've done in the past up until the present moment.
Okay.
So what kind of coping skills do they have in their tool belt? What kind of community resources do they have? Are they linked with the psychiatrist or other community members? What does the interactions look like with friends, their social environment? What does your relationship look like with them?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that is, what are the resources that we have on board in this present moment?
Okay.
The other thing I want to look at is, what are the demands that we have on our plate? So if we're transitioning into like something new, that in itself can be a demand. And so what other demands do we have on our plate? Do we have maybe some family stress that's happening? Are there some rifts in communication that we need to address, to help support our child?
Right.
The other thing, so now that we have an idea of what resources and demands are, what I want to know is, are they kind of looking like this? Or if we have like demands and the resources are low, we have to make sure that we're closing the gap, so to speak, this way.
Okay.
And not that there's ever going to be this perfect balance. I don't know that actually exists. I think we love to use the word balance, but more so, how do we kind of create more of this harmonious flow so that we're not tipping the scale with too many demands and not enough resources.
Right.
And I think once we're in that place, it's also looking at our history. A lot of times we all have a baseline mood of how we operate in the real world.
Right.
We all have stressors. What stresses me out doesn't necessarily stress you out. What does your stress look like? And so when we know that there's going to be certain obstacles that are going to kind of be a repeat in history, whether it's, I have a lot of academic things that I need to get done, or I have a lot of social activities and that's overwhelming,
Right.
we can account for those moments moving forward. So how do we implement more resources when we know that things are going to get more stressful,
Right.
using all of the history and hindsight knowledge that we have to this point?
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to balance out those three things as
Right.
best as we can.
Right. That is amazing, because I hear you say you're bringing everything full circle, right? And you're analyzing, literally.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just trying to see where we are. Where do we need to put the work? Is it the resources? Is it, I like what you said about the tool belt, right?
Yeah.
Get your tools in your tool belt, because those are things that we're, even as adults, right? We're constantly working on skills. And so it's important that we teach our children to have these skills as they transition into adulthood. Adulthood is hard.
Absolutely.
Really hard. It's really hard. And when I think about transitioning, I think about just this you use the word demand, right? Very demanding point in your life where you're paying bills. You have to be responsible for yourself. So yeah, those things are gonna be stressful. So how do we manage that? Really good information. Parents, I hope you're listening, because it's tough out there for those kids.
That it is.
They need resources. So it's up to us. Now we're going to talk about something that is it's a very pressing need in our community, in our society. How do we handle this social media business, right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Goodness, right? Now I'm going to open up a can of worms.
Large
Excuse me, you
topic,
guys.
yes.
Open the can. Ready? Okay, so this is the setup. Most adolescents today have grown up with easy access to social media, let's face it, and unlimited internet time. This has led to issues with comparison, right? With your self-image, the need to be validated through likes and followers, and look at me and I can do this. It's quite a change from when we were coming up.
Absolutely.
A big change.
Understatement, yes.
Right, to say the least. So this is going to be a two-part question.
Okay.
As we take this dive, you guys. So part one is, as teens transition into adulthood and our ability to chat about their insecurities, societal expectations, and validation becomes a bit harder. Wouldn't you agree?
Yep, absolutely.
So is there a way to help support them through this as they mature? You know, they're growing up, they're learning about what life is, what it takes to live. And we all know it's difficult being a human being, right? This is not an easy feat. So how do we support them through that? What is your take on that?
I mean, it's such a big topic, and I think it's an ongoing topic because social media is everywhere.
Yes.
There's such easy access to it. We get immediate information, and kids, like you said, I grew up in an age at least where there wasn't social media in my childhood.
Oh no.
And I'm very thankful for that.
Right.
I think it'd be really hard to grow up at this time.
Yes.
Because I think I'd be a very stressed out human. With that being said, I think one of the bigger conversations that I have with kids, because I get that all the time when they're coming into my office, they're comparing themselves to other people. Well, so-and-so has it figured out. They're able to do this.
Right.
Why can somebody do this, but I can't? And so I think a lot of it is looking at, one, really normalizing that a lot of the stuff that's being put out there on social media is most people are putting their best foot forward.
Yeah.
This isn't a realistic snapshot of what's going on, right? This is a snippet of somebody's life. I think the other thing too is, let's have a conversation about perfectionism versus authenticity. I think in this day and age with social media, it's really easy to get caught up in everything having to be a certain way, or I have to look a certain way, or I have to behave in a certain way. I'm supposed to have this many followers. And that is not helpful, right? Because perfectionism is not an obtainable or realistic goal.
No.
So I love having the conversation about authenticity. Does that feel good? Is this strive to get so many followers feel good for you? Does it sit well in your body? Do you feel good when you're doing it, or is it creating more harm than good? I think oftentimes when we start to really explore those topics with teens, and they're transitioning outside of the house, I think it's easier for them to start exploring, wow, like I don't feel authentic. That's such a big conversation too, because oftentimes the kids I work with will talk about that authenticity piece. Like, I don't feel like myself, or this doesn't really sound like me, or I don't really want to do this. Okay, great. So what leads you to do that? So I think, again, it goes back to communication. How can we explore conversations with our children with open-ended questions that are going to lead you to more questions that you can ask? And it gives you a framework for how to identify maybe some of the thought processes that they're going through or their belief system about how they're supposed to show up in this world. And I think it's also a really good opportunity, I think, for adults as caregivers to be able to say, like, hey, I feel that way sometimes too. You know, there's moments when I get caught up in comparing myself to somebody else who I see, you know, on social media whose business looks a certain way. I need to be doing that. And then I find myself on this hamster wheel. And then I'm like, this doesn't feel good. Like, I need to take a step back. So I think it's also really good to model your own experience with social media and kind of make it like a very normal thing. But how do we create a solution that feels good for both of us, that feels authentic for us personally?
Wow. That's incredible, because I think as a parent, your first notion is to just say, nope, that's it, nope. You know, you can't have social media, you know, you don't know how to handle it, but you're giving us solutions. You're giving the audience an understanding of where we can meet our children. I am just kind of really pleased at the fact that there is a solution, and you're giving us a broader view on what we can do, you know, instead of just being honestly fearful, right? Because that's the first thing that comes up. It's just fear. Oh, you're on social media. And the other thing that you said that was very profound was we're just seeing that very minute snapshot of that person. This time is just freezing right there on their page. You don't see the real life. You don't see the real struggles. You just see, oh, I'm here, I'm happy, I'm in this place, but that's just so fleeting, right?
Absolutely.
And then I'll take the conversation a different way. You see sometimes in the headlines, you know, the happy couple, the happy young person, you know, on social media, and then tragedy strikes, right? Because you don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. We really don't know, right? Thank you for that. So part 2, how can we identify behavior that could be signs that this is affecting their mental health? What are the signs and symptoms? What are we looking for?
I think with social media, it's such a broad concept, but I would say if we're looking at some of that comparison stuff, a lot of it would be negative social comparison. So if there's language or expressions about, you know, well, so-and-so can do this, but I can't. Really kind of like, they seem better than I do. Those types of things. It would be a lack of self-confidence, I think, can come up a lot with this too, especially when we're doing that comparison. People-pleasing behaviors. So really want to put your best foot forward, but it doesn't feel authentic, or really how you would naturally operate in the real world. I think, you know, difficulty setting boundaries or saying no can also fall under that people-pleasing category. And then I think the other thing too is, are there any shifts in the way that we're seeing use of social media? Whether it's, I want to, you know, be on there 24/7, and maybe we've seen an increase in that, or maybe even pulling back on it. So, you know, bullying is a very common thing that's happening online, and it's so behind the scenes, and that's been a, you know, that's definitely a bigger topic. But I think it's also important to notice, like, sometimes kids don't always want to jump into social media. Sometimes they want to retract and move back. And then I would also say, you know, looking at your child's baseline behavior. So how do they operate on a baseline level more days than not? And if you're seeing a change in those behaviors moving forward, I think that's a really good thing. So maybe they were really social before, now they're isolating. Or they used to, you know, come down and hang out for dinner or meet us on the weekends and partake in, you know, family activities, and now they want to spend all their time online. You know, and then in the most extreme forms, I think we're obviously looking at things, unfortunately, like eating disorders, substance use, you know, high levels of stress, anxiety, mood disorders. If we're not kind of, I think, looking at those like a little small, more finite types of behaviors and symptoms along the way.
That is really good information, because what I hear you saying too is that the parents have to be actively involved in making sure that when they see these signs, because some of them sound like they might be very subtle. It might not be pretty labile. It might not just be so apparent or blatant in your face. So this is where the identifying and knowing your child, right, is where it really comes in handy.
And I would also encourage parents on that same note to, you know, peruse social media, see what's out there. You know, what is your response like to social media as well? You know, what are the kids looking at, whether it's, you know, a video game or a social media platform that they connect with other people?
Right.
I think just getting, or are they just reading things on there? You know, some kids are on, you know, their electronics because they're doing like brain type of games. I think those are far less sometimes, but they still happen. Yes. So I think it's good just to kind of get a feel for what your child's doing. And then you can always ask those questions too, like, hey, what do you love about social media? You know, what does social media provide for you that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get like in a social setting? A lot of our kids, you know, are really having some difficulties engaging socially, and social media has really lent itself well, I think, in that way to have social interactions with people.
That's right.
So I don't, like you said, I think it is really good to kind of point out, we don't want to necessarily go to the extreme and just cut everything off out of fear, but I think it begs parents to have more questions and really just know what's going on behind the scenes.
You have to be woke.
Yes.
Stay woke, as they say, because things are coming, and it's very fast paced. I will say, you know, that we have the trends, we have things that are constantly changing with social media, and self-image is, I think, one of the biggest components that you know can be so damaging. So that's very helpful.
Are you or someone you know looking for treatment options in Los Angeles? The Los Angeles Outpatient Center is an adult clinic specializing in mental health and eating disorders. Located in Culver City, California, LAOP offers day and evening programs to accommodate individuals' busy lives and treatment needs. Each treatment plan is individualized and includes both group and individual therapy sessions and daily free nourishing meals. Most major insurance companies are accepted, and their program specialists are there to help you every step of the way. Learn more at laopcenter.com or by calling 888-928-3805.
So now let's talk about another topic. Co-parenting during difficult times. So we're going to take a left turn here, if you will, you guys. Here's the situation. I'm co-parenting with my ex-wife, and our son keeps calling and asking us to make his appointments, demanding money, that moolah, and being overly rude every time he needs something. Excuse me. I'm trying to stay stern, keep my boundaries, as I was taught, but his mom keeps giving in to his behavior and allowing it. So here's the question, you guys. How can parents strike a balance between allowing their children to face life challenges and difficulties? You know, maybe they need to stub their toe or bump their head a little bit, right? While also providing support and guidance to help them become more self-sufficient during times of change. What do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely think this is an area where a lot of parents struggle, for sure, of, you know, when do I step in? When do I step back? When do I set boundaries? Am I gonna, if I set a boundary, am I gonna offset something else? I think there's a lot of fear in creating containment, is what I like to call it. So one of the first questions I would love parents to ask themselves is, are there things that I'm doing for my child that they can otherwise do themselves? And really take inventory. So whether it's a mental note, open up your phone and make, you know, write on your notes, send yourself an email, write on a piece of paper. But I think at that point you have a good idea of all the things you're doing for your child, and then you can look at that list and go like, oh my gosh, there's definitely things that they can be doing for themselves. Because I think a lot of times parents take that inventory and they're like, I can give them this, I can give them this, I can give them this. The other question I would ask yourself is, what are the frustrations that come up about my child's independence? So what are the things that you find yourself getting super frustrated about? I know a common thing for parents is seeing that their kids don't necessarily want to like drive, and that they're okay just kind of having somebody else drive them. That's been a common trend, I feel. Or being able to like budget finances. You know, that money that child wants is a big one, and I think that's a pretty general one for parents.
Right. Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. Letting go is what I'm hearing, you know, when you say examining and trying to figure out, is this something that they can do versus me doing it? Delegate. Delegating these tasks.
And then I think once you have that list too, you can start asking yourself, you know, does my child have the skills and resources to carry out some of this stuff? Because there could be things that we're doing for a child, but they don't necessarily have the skills or the tools or the resources to be able to do it on their own. So that's extra information for us to work with. So now that we know that they can't maybe, budget as effectively as we would like them to, what skills or resources can we teach them? What can we model for them? How can we support them with that? So we can move it from like, I do this to they're now doing this on our list.
Yes, and I can imagine as a parent, that would lighten the load for the parent, so that would decrease your stress and anxiety.
Absolutely. And there's so many parents that I work with that will come in frustrated and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. And then I'll be like, is there anything that they can do for themselves? And like, it's like this moment of like, wow, like my mind has been blown, but I think we just get so caught up in wanting to support and help that we don't realize that there's so much stuff that they could be doing on their own. Are they going to struggle sometimes? Absolutely. So I think part of it too becomes like a patience piece, or sometimes it's quicker for us to do it versus our child in that learning curve. But I think the more that we can really take a good assessment of where we're at will be incredibly helpful.
I like that. So part 2, how do we establish guidelines as a family to be on the same page? I've heard that term so much, just in everyday life. Let's be on the same page. Let's work together. Let's collaborate, if you will. So what is your take on that?
Well, I would like to first say that I think everybody's page looks different, which is why I like that you said the collaboration piece. Because I think oftentimes we walk in with our piece of paper and we're like, here, follow this. And then we're all going to be in this like peaceful environment working. I think we have sometimes unrealistic expectations about what should and can happen. But I also think it's like really acknowledging like, this is just my perspective of what I think could be helpful. But let me see your page and see where we can kind of meet together on some of these things. I think if you're in the co-parenting situation, oftentimes you don't have control over what's happening, in the other household. So again, I would encourage parents to take inventory. What can you control? But then also what can you influence, right? So I may not be able to control what happens in your household, but I can always influence by having a conversation on what I observe. That doesn't mean you're going to do what I want you to, but at least you've had that moment to release all that stuff that maybe you're holding on to or getting resentful about. And then I think if you don't have necessarily this, perfect scenario or ideal situation where the pages are matching up, I think it's having the conversation with your child on boundaries of saying like, hey, like I've noticed that I've been giving in this way and it's not benefiting you. Or I'm worried that the way that I've been, giving you money endlessly to go do all these social activities isn't really helping you learn how to budget. And so we need to work on that together. Let's sit down and come up with a creative solution. And then I think it's both, everybody can throw in ideas into the hat, but at the end of the day, caregivers can do what they see fit, and what they know for their child. But I think it also goes back to what you're talking about. It really empowers the child to, I think, to be accountable and be responsible, but also say like, hey, if you don't like the way we want to do this, then come up with like, be part of the conversation, right? Because I think a lot of times kids will be like, well, I just want it this way. And it's like, okay, I get that, but I want you to join me in the conversation so that you feel like you have some control over what's happening. What's your influence?
Yes. And what a wonderful skill to obtain, at that young age like that, being able to understand that, you don't have control, right? But you have a say, right? So you can use your communication skills. You can come to me, again, you talked about that open-ended conversation and keeping the lines of communication open. So that we're just kind of tying everything in. I see it. It's coming to me, guys. I'm having an epiphany moment myself. Thank you for that. So now let's take it from a guardian's perspective. Parent, guardian, caretaker, all those words. So here's the situation. My son is about to go off to college. Tearing up here. And as a single parent, I'm having an overwhelming amount of anxiety about this, being alone for the first time in years. The question that I'm going to ask Christina is, how can I be there for my child while exploring this new experience for myself? Because I'm, I got to have a life too, right?
I feel for the empty nesters.
Yes, I know.
Every time I hear about it, I'm always like, I'm far away from there. So I'm like, I still have some time, but it definitely gives me that gut feeling where I'm like, oh man, this is going to be a tough one.
Yes.
One of the things that I love to talk to parents about is this idea between adaptation and change and those transitions that happen and how that intersects with this idea of grief and loss. Because I think what's happening during that transition as our child is now, going off to college. It's such an amazing time. We're really excited, but I think we also have mixed feelings and we're like, this is going to be a change, it's going to be different. So I think it's really important for parents to really assess how they deal with change and transitions at any given moment. Because I think that's going to give us a lot of key ideas of what we personally need.
Right.
I think the other thing in this scenario too is just to remember this is like a very normal part of that transition phase is like feeling like I'm so excited, but I'm so sad. And really having to hold those two feelings together, I think is really difficult because oftentimes we feel like it should be one thing or the other, but those two feelings can hold space, you know, together and not kind of tip the scale that one's better than the other or one has more value than the other. But I also think it's really important for the grief and loss piece to come in too. When we're transitioning through anything in life, especially with something that feels a lot bigger and it's a huge shift, right? Especially if our kid is going far off and we're not going to be able to just drive for 20 minutes to see them or 30 minutes, that is a loss.
Huge.
You know what I mean? It's a change in our system. It's a change in what we're doing. We're having to relinquish a lot of control. We're having to trust the process. We're having to trust our child, which is, you know, it's different when you have them in your house and you're wanting to trust them with like a little bit of like, they don't have that much space. So I think it's really important too to acknowledge that this is a time that you're going to have to grieve some of those changes, and that's okay to do. And I think simultaneously also doing things for yourself and creating like this new space for you to like reinvent yourself or redefine yourself. It doesn't have to be a huge shift, but